again, I'd like to thank Patrick for the invitation, and it is an absolute honour to speak at a memorial event for Rosemary Nelson, who I've always tremendously admired, and who was such a brave lawyer, and so hope to do her kind of justice in what I say. In terms of my background on the issue, I carried out research over a lot of years now into prisoners' rights, and particularly, as you said, the rights of women prisoners and young prisoners, and that was done with a colleague, Phil Scraton. We did work for the Human Rights Commission on the situation for women in Mournhouse when women were held there in Maghaberry, and then when the women moved to Hydebank Wood, we did research there that was published for the Commission, although I'm just talking for myself this evening. But I know that Phil would like to have been here, and that he'd be thinking about everyone and about the evening, and would send his good wishes. In our research, what we found and what we've argued was that the fact that the state used such oppressive measures against political prisoners throughout the conflict has left a really deep impact, not only on the units in which political prisoners are held, but a really deep impact on the whole prison system, and means that all prisoners, political and so-called ordinary prisoners, are subject to very harsh and oppressive measures because of the whole security focus of the prison system in the north. And just in my 10 minutes, as evidence of that really, and of the human rights abuse that runs right through the core of the prison system here, I want to refer particularly to the cases of two women. Marian Price, a political prisoner whose situation I know you all know very well, and that many of you have been involved in campaigning for the end of her detention. And also the case of Frances McKeown, who was a 23-year-old woman, mother of young children, who died in Hydebank Wood Women's Prison in May 2011, in the very same month that Marian Price was first detained in Maghaberry Prison on the power of the Secretary of State. The treatment of Marian Price, as you know only too well, since May 2011, shows in its very starkest form the power, the unjust and oppressive nature in which the state uses its power in the prisons in the north of Ireland. And for almost 2 years, Marian has endured that solitary confinement that we've just heard that Sharon Rafferty is also experiencing. First in Maghaberry, male high security prison, and then with her transfer supposedly on health grounds, although we know from prison inspection reports and from the Ombudsman's reports that the very last place you would send anyone to on health grounds is Hydebank Wood Prison, because the health care there is so poor, so inadequate. The impact of solitary confinement on Marian's health has been really well documented, and we all know about it, to the extent of it becoming the concern of the United Nations at an international level. Marian's situation has raised clear issues relating to Article 5 of the European Convention, the right to liberty and security of the person, Article 6, the right to fair trial, and most importantly really Article 3, the right to be free from torture, inhuman and degrading treatment. And in 2011, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Juan Mendez, called for an absolute prohibition of solitary confinement for a period over 15 days. 15 days when we compare that to the almost 2 years that Marian has endured, and the months and months that Sharon Rafferty, now we're discovering, has also endured. And the Special Rapporteur said that to detain someone in solitary confinement for over 15 days constitutes not only a threat to their health, but also it can amount to torture, inhuman and degrading treatment. And it's to the absolute shame of the state here, the state authorities, that they're holding anyone in those conditions. There were also times during her imprisonment, and Phil and I saw it when we visited Marian, when she was observed exclusively by male staff, and she was under the surveillance of male staff. And that's a situation which again is completely in breach of international human rights standards. So it's clear that Marian, as a political prisoner, has had her rights breached in a whole range of ways. What I want to do then is to broaden the discussion in a way that Patricia has also done, to talk about the way that the state abuses the rights of all prisoners, from the very fact of a person being held in custody. And I think it's really important to raise public awareness of the situation for all women prisoners, particularly in Northern Ireland. Because what we'd argued was that the fact, as I said, that the prison system has become so oppressive and so security dominated during the conflict, because of its concern to manage and to regulate and to oppress political prisoners, that women prisoners, who are a very vulnerable group in society, are suffering the consequences of that. And they're, as a group, although women do show resistance to their situation, many women prisoners charged through the ordinary courts are very vulnerable and experience mental health issues, and find it very difficult to resist the power of the state. So, as we know, all women prisoners in Northern Ireland, with the exception of the situation regarding Marian when she was held in Gabry, all women prisoners are held in Ash House in Hydebank Wood, which we've described as a prison within a prison. It's a women's prison unit within a male young offender centre. And our research, where we spent a lot of months with women in Ash House, and we found that their rights were breached in a whole range of ways. Just refer to some of those. Women, for example, were transported regularly in the prison vans, the so-called horse boxes, with young male prisoners, and they suffered extreme verbal abuse from those young men during transportation, to the extent that some said that they absolutely dreaded the abuse that they would get in the vans. We heard also from women about the degradation of strip searching, and I know that some of you in this room know only too well about the situation regarding strip searching, and you've campaigned around that issue. When we first visited Ash House, women were strip searched when they went into the prison. They were strip searched randomly. They were strip searched every visit that they had, whether it was from a professional or from their family. And all said to us that they found it completely degrading. The visits area is shared with young men, and again, women felt very much on show in that situation. We know about the inadequate health care in Hydebank Wood, really poor communication between the prison health care system and the doctors outside, so that women very often aren't getting the medication which doctors have prescribed them to on the outside. Women punished, women with severe mental health problems, put in isolation cells simply because they were self-harming or threatening suicide. Long periods of lockdown. At best, we found, on the very best day, a woman would get 8 out of 24 hours out of her cell. On the worst days, it would be 23 hours locked up in her cell. Very limited access to education and training, very few work opportunities for the woman. And women subject to very harsh discipline. Many women said to us they felt they were treated like children by the prison guards. Limited support on release in terms of things like accommodation. Many of the women with no homes to go to once they left prison, and getting very little help with that. Our findings have been backed by and echoed by numerous inspection reports, reports by the independent monitoring boards, reports by international human rights bodies, and yet the situation still goes on, and women are still, years later, still in this situation. We know that women in prison within Northern Ireland and internationally are a really vulnerable group. Many women end up in prison simply for mental health reasons, because of the policies of care in the community. We know there's inadequate mental health provision in Northern Ireland. Women are getting into trouble and ending up in prison, really because of their mental health issues. We know that many women in prison have histories of domestic violence, histories of abuse and violence against them prior to coming into the prison. Many women are ending up in prison simply because they haven't paid a fine. On one day's research in Hydebank Wood, we interviewed 4 women who'd been brought in on one day simply because they hadn't paid the TV licence. And essentially those women are ending up in prison because they're poor, no other reason than that. They had to choose between buying, it was coming up to Christmas, had to choose between buying Christmas presents for the kids or going to prison for a few days so that they wouldn't have to pay the fine. So I want to just finish by just saying something brief about the case of Frances McKeown, who, as I said, died in Hydebank Wood in 2011, aged 23. Frances had a history of mental health problems going right back to her teenage years. She disclosed abuse that came out. Her disclosure of abuse happened when she was in Hydebank Wood. She was known to the health authorities on the outside and was under the care of a community mental health team before she went into Hydebank Wood. Despite the fact that it was known that she suffered from these very severe mental health problems, she had extremely poor health treatment in Hydebank Wood. She experienced very long periods of lockdown, despite the fact that that made the voices in her head worse and that she dreaded being locked in her cell by herself, because she said that she could hear the voices. Despite the fact that a nurse had referred her, a mental health nurse had identified the need for a referral to a psychiatrist, the Prisoner Ombudsman's report tells us that Frances didn't see a psychiatrist until 6 months after she was committed to Hydebank Wood. I want to just read you briefly from a letter that Frances wrote from Hydebank Wood before her death. She said, "The voices in my head are getting worse and more violent. They run me down and make me so angry. It's like I'm sitting on my own in the cell, but there's someone in the room with me telling me what to do and to hurt people. I have to fight. It's so hard not to try to listen to it. At night, when I'm in my cell, it is worst, because I can't distract myself from it. All I can do is listen to the horrific things it tells me to do. Hell every day of my life. If I'm dead, it will all be over for me. I wouldn't have to suffer anymore. I can't put up with it any longer. I just can't do it anymore. I'm done trying. I just want to die and end it all. I can't put up with it anymore. It's too hard and too tiring. Just let me die." And in May 2011, as I said, Frances McKeown was found dead in her cell on the same day that a young male prisoner was also found dead in Hydebank Wood. What I want to argue really is that it's the same state that's suppressing political prisoners and breaching their rights, and that is breaching the rights of Marian Price, that very same state that's using that power that is also breaching the rights of women prisoners who've been through the ordinary courts. And I think really that it would be a testimony to Rosemary Nelson for us to fight injustice from whatever quarter it comes from and to whoever it's aimed at. Thank you very much.